All right, so we did our research on how does insufficient funding affect education within Washington State and as well as the residents.
It is the paramount duty of the state to make ample provision for the education of all children residing within its borders, without distinction or preference on account of race, caste, color, or sex. That's from the Washington State Constitution, Article 9.
Okay, so our issue is that with Washington State, we have a lot of school funding issues. So, as Anna stated before in her little quote, Washington State is not fulfilling its own constitutional duty because we are not receiving the proper funding we need. The levy lid on education funding has increased 24%. So that
the levy lid being the amount of tax dollars that we can use towards education.
Exactly. So it has increased, but not significantly enough. And we also have a really high student-to-teacher ratio, which I will get into later on. And that leads to frustration, like this guy. Okay, so our declared goals for Washington State as a whole, not our own goals, like personally as individuals, but with Washington State, we want to accomplish proper education funding by 2018. And this was because of the McCleary case that we had settled in Supreme Court. And we also want to decrease student-to-teacher ratios for obvious reasons. And we also want to improve student learning and test scores. So my lens is primarily on the cultural and social lens, which I will get into soon after this. It's mostly focused on how other people perceive what's going on in the situation and how opinions and differing factors affect student education.
I'm doing the economic view, and I mainly will be talking about percentages of funding that Washington State does, and like how much of their total income they use towards it. And I'm also gonna compare how much it has increased or decreased over the years, and then real quick I'll go over the funding part of the McCleary case.
I'm Anna, and I'm going over the political and historical view. I'm mostly focusing on just actions taken by our state government in regards to education funding.
Okay, so I'm going to be starting off with primarily protests, which might seem like a little bit of a weird foot to start off from. But a lot of protests and walkouts, I'm sure at least someone's had a teacher that's talked about school funding issues and have walked out on certain things. We have several different cases within Washington State. A lot of them haven't really been documented, but there was one noticeable one in 2015 where we had over 100,000 teachers walk out in protest of school funding. And according to Leah Todd of the Seattle Times, she writes about how it's primarily the teachers in Seattle, or at least in the bigger cities, that tend to walk out of schools. And the reason why I wanted to start off on this point is because you can tell that there is a really big lack in school funding, because teachers definitely notice that they're probably facing the worst of it because of the lack of funding. And that's why we are actually doing this presentation, because we can tell what the issue is. And so this is actually the amount of funding that we have seen on the national level and on the Washington State level. So Washington State is the red line, and as you can see, we have significantly decreased in the amount of funding we have received, while the rest of the nation has increased, which is an issue. This is also the amount of money we spend per pupil or student. And on the national level, again, red line, and Washington State is the blue line. And with the blue line, we see that there is a slight increase, which is, pretty good, but still not good enough, and it's not anything compared to the national average. Then we also have statewide test results. Now, in 2012, we suffered a huge decrease in school funding, which is also the time when we received this huge drop in test results pupils from third graders. And we also have a really big difference between the national and ratios between pupils per teachers. So we have about 16 pupils per teachers on a national level, but here in Washington State we have a little bit less than 20, which is still a pretty large gap.
Alright, so I'm going to start off with the NEA, or Network for Excellence in Washington State. They ended up doing a lawsuit against Washington State for the education funding because it was low. In the state's constitution, in the state's constitution, that says the state has a paramount duty to sufficiently fund education. Alright. So, for percent change in total state funding per student, Washington doesn't do that bad. Between 2008 and 2014, we went down 0.9%. It's still negative though, so good on the positive side would be good. Okay, percent change in state funding per student in 2008 to 2016. We were actually doing really good. We were at 16.5, third best state nationwide. And with percentage change of funded per student between 2015 and 2016, we were actually 8.3%, and again, we were the third best in the nation. Alright, so I'm going to talk about the McCleary case now. The McCleary case was a lawsuit filed in January 2007 on behalf of two families against the state of Washington for not meeting its constitutional obligation to sufficiently fund a uniform system of education. The court ruled that the state was in fact not sufficiently funding the system of education. And this is what the court said. Given the gravity of the state's ongoing violation of its constitutional obligation to sufficiently provide public educational funding, and in light of the need for expeditions and actions, the time has come for the court to impose sanctions. Due to this ruling by the court, Washington State is fined $100,000 a day until they are sufficiently funded a system of education.
Alright, so the beginning of the political actions was in 1977 with the McCleary case that Jacob just talked about. Following that, the judge who preceded that was he had the legislator define basic education, which then led to a whole timeline of things. So the McCleary case, it began in 1977, but it was filed in 2010, so it took a while. Basically what it ended up with was, hey, Washington's not doing what they should be doing. In response, the Basic Education Act of 1977 was created, which said, it set requirements for how many days of school we were supposed to have, how many hours of school we're supposed to have, and the bare minimum of students per class. The Levy Lid Act was setting, this is how much of the tax dollars can go into education. It started at 10%, today it's at 24%. So, yeah, it's gotten a lot higher, which it shouldn't have to. So, councils and committees have been created since then, all of which have tried and fail to come up with a plan. And when they have come up with plans, they don't actually propose any funding ideas. They're like, hey, we could do this, but I don't know who's going to pay for it. So acts and bills have also happened since then. 3 House bills and 2 acts. The last House Bill 2776, set a deadline for 2016 for a hard plan and some results. Out of all of that, there has been no increase in federal state funding.
All right, so I would like to touch base back on the McCleary case. Some of you might be wondering the significance of the McCleary case. It's basically run by the McCleary family, of course, who filed it in 2010, as Anna and Jacob said. But it's not just because of like the fact that their children are also suffering from the lack of proper school funding. This has also led to, this case has actually led to the Supreme Court, and they have actually fined Washington State $100,000 every single day that we are unable to properly fund our schools. So it's been several years. So we have owed and been fined several millions of dollars simply because we are not funding our schools properly.
So our solution. First off, a lot of those bills that I talked about, they gave large sums of money to certain people, but they were worded in specific ways to create this or come up with this idea, not to put it into action, which is why we haven't seen any actions.
They mostly have actually passed on responsibilities to others. So it's more like, it's your problem, not my problem now. So, of course, at the same time, this results in the lack of change that we need to see. And we do, because of the McCleary case, have a 2018 deadline, but we haven't made any effort to fix that. And again, it's been several years, and it's only 2 more years until it does come to happen.
So they need to start properly paying their teachers. They're still not being paid enough and underfunded by the state to help pay for that. And upper class needs to start paying heavier taxes because since the higher classes are getting more money, they are able to give a little bit more than the lower classes are.
Right, and we should be able to use local levies, which levies are tax dollars, but at the same time that's technically illegal. The OSPI, our Washington State Superintendent's Office of Public Instruction, his name is Randy Dorn, and he actually, I believe, he fined and sued 11 different districts for using local levies, including Washington State, not Washington State, Seattle and Everett.